Welcome back to Good Morning Arizona. Maricopa County Attorney Allister Adel making the decision not to charge a DPS trooper in a deadly freeway shooting, but says that call was not an easy one. We are talking about that confrontation along the Loop 101 in May that ended in the shooting death of Dion Johnson and ignited intense emotions, calls for police reform, and protests in the streets of Phoenix. According to the report in this case, Trooper George Cervantes found Dion Johnson passed out in the driver's seat of his vehicle parked along the Loop 101. The trooper says he smelled alcohol and took a gun off of the passenger seat. Now, Trooper George Cervantes says he could not get the keys out of the ignition and actually called for backup. He says Johnson then began to move as they struggled and the trooper tried to take him into custody. Cervantes fired 2 shots during that struggle. Dion Johnson died from those injuries at the hospital. The mother of Johnson says Trooper Cervantes' actions were wrong and her son should be alive today.
I still feel George Cervantes is a monster and he needs to be arrested for my son's murder. Period. Why is it that they're saying, oh, George Cervantes, his statement is true, he did this, he did that, but none of it is true.
So Johnson says she believes the trooper in this case was actually the aggressor rather than her son, and believes that he would be alive today if the trooper had waited for backup. So the county attorney says this decision, of course, was just based on the troopers relaying of the details of this. Multiple eyewitnesses weighed in on this incident, and there was also some photographic evidence of the scene. However, it is important to note the attorney for the family says even though there were witnesses on scene, he says that they were driving by on the freeway at speeds that wouldn't really give them a good idea of what was playing out in those critical moments to determine whether the trooper acted appropriately or not. So joining us to talk about the decision made in this case is Maricopa County Attorney Allister Adel. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I know these are critically important decisions for communities, in particular in light of this moment and movement that we're experiencing across the country as we hear growing louder voices calling for police reform and a more critical eye to be on acts of violence or extra aggression towards people of color at the hands of police. So thank you so much for talking with us this morning. And I want to get to the root of why you decided that the trooper was acting appropriately. We know that there was a gun in the car. It is my understanding that the trooper had secured that gun. So he must have felt threatened at the time. What did you deduce from that?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And this is a very important issue for our community, especially in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. People want to know what the answers are. And this was a difficult case. So your question is about how did I deduce what we came to say is not charging. We have an ethical standard in our office. And it's not just, can we get a conviction? Is there a reasonable likelihood of conviction? So that we are not putting people through the court system needlessly. However, in this particular case, in any officer-involved shooting, we have a critical incident review committee. And in my commitment to transparency, we have added community members who have applied to be there, and we had 4 on this particular incident. And those people advised me on what to do, and I ultimately make the decision. And yes, he did have a gun on the seat. He had ammunition in the car. There was odor of alcohol. There was open alcohol containers. And the trooper was trying to wait for backup. However, he saw movement in the car and he thought Mr. Johnson was going to drive off because the trooper could not take the keys out of the ignition and that he was going to endanger other passengers. In Arizona, we call this actual physical control. Meaning that you're behind the wheel, you might be asleep, you wake up, but you could drive off at any point. So he was concerned for the safety of others, and that's why he went to the driver's side of the car to talk with Mr. Johnson, and then 2 separate struggles ensued, and unfortunately, Mr. Johnson lost his life.
And DPS troopers are in dangerous situations every time they pull a vehicle over on a highway. We know what can go on, and we've seen that play out in the community in less stressful circumstances than this. How critically important was it, as you evaluated this situation, to think about the trooper being potentially hit by another vehicle, potentially thrust in a struggle into oncoming traffic? Was that, in essence, the most dangerous threat against the trooper's safety himself or herself?
Well, it was certainly a factor in the discussion that we had, and a factor in my decision. Typically, Department of Public Safety or sheriff that stop people on the highways, they approach from the passenger side because of their safety. In this situation, the trooper did approach from the passenger side to secure that weapon initially. But when he was waiting for backup and he saw movement in the car and he hadn't been able to get the key out of the ignition, he knew he had to make sure that this car was not going to go out and hurt other people. So he did approach from the passenger side, leaving him in a lane of traffic on a highway on Memorial Day, May 25th. And Mr. Johnson put his body in a position where the trooper thought he was either going to be kicked or pushed into oncoming traffic. He did put a handcuff on Mr. Johnson's left hand, but it was at that point, he calmed down a little bit, Mr. Johnson did, but later on, in a matter of seconds, because all this took place within a matter of seconds. You have to remember that. Mr. Johnson grabbed the trooper's vest, and then he reached for the hand where the trooper was trying to reholster his gun, because he said to Mr. Johnson, "Stop resisting or I have to shoot you." But he grabbed for the gun. And that's where the second struggle ensued. And the trooper was in fear for his life at that point, because he was being pulled into the vehicle, and Mr. Johnson's hand was on his wrist, grabbing for the weapon.
Okay. As we're very tight on time, but let me just wrap up with asking you, of course, I know you've gone on record as wishing that all of our law enforcement officers were wearing body cameras at all times. This would give you a better picture, and maybe would give some clarity to the family of Dion Johnson as to what played out in those moments. But would that have potentially changed the way that you approached this case? Do we have audio recording of those communications? What would you like to see change moving forward so that a case like this would maybe not rip the community up in the way that it has?
Well, in the community, look, I'm a member here too. I love our community, and this is unfortunate. We did have at least corroborating witnesses, some that saw this on camera, some that were driving by, but we did not have body-worn cameras. And that's why I'm calling for mandated body-worn cameras on all uniformed officers in the field. Would it have changed the outcome? I can't speculate to that, but at the very least, more information helps us as prosecutors. It helps victims. It helps learn about a case. It helps our community's confidence in our criminal justice system. And that's why I support mandatory use of body-worn cameras on all uniformed officers in the field.
And we know that the family plans to litigate, at least civilly, on the state level and with the Department of Public Safety. Of that, your office will not be involved, correct?
That's correct. We look at the criminal charges of this, and we do not speculate or pass judgment on civil litigation or if departmental policies or procedures were followed.
Maricopa County Attorney Allister Adel, it is a challenging job that your office takes on a daily basis, and we really appreciate you talking with us about an important case, a very emotional one, certainly for the family of Dion Johnson and, of course, for the family of Trooper George Cervantes. So thank you so much.